Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the post-ANZAC edition version of the BigFooty Bombercast for season 2022. Unfortunately, the result did not go our way in probably what is probably going to be our biggest game for the year, because I think finals are now a write-off. But this evening, I'm actually not joined by the Grizz. I've sent him off on a fact-finding mission to find out why we have been so horrifically poor this season, and I have no doubt next week he'll have all the answers for us. But to slide into his seat tonight is somebody that's familiar to all our listeners, and that is Kiptastic. How are you this evening?
Good, thanks, Bonds. It'd be better if we were speaking after a win. I was hoping, it's been a few weeks since I've been on. I was hoping I would be the good luck charm to have us talking about a win, but unfortunately, a few things went wrong. A lot of things to talk about, coming out of that game. But yeah, overall, I feel about as flat as you sound. So yeah, I think it's not going to be a very energetic podcast tonight, I don't think.
No, look, I am fairly flat, and it's hard because I don't want to come onto this podcast every week and rip into the side, because constant negativity can be quite deflating, not only for myself but for listeners and as supporters of the club. We like to try and be as positive as we can, but we'll start today with something that's just, I don't know what's going on, because they got the rev up for it last week, they got the rev up for it the week before, week in, week out. Either Truck's game plan's not working or the players aren't implementing it. I don't know what it is, but our ability to set up a zone or go man on man and stop defensive movement from the opposition team from our forward 50 to their forward 50, our full ground defense is just, it's horrific at the moment. I don't understand how an AFL club can allow a side to move so easily from one end of the ground to the other and not be able to do it the other way at all, which is what's going on with us at the moment.
The players seem to get sucked in too much to the play and to where the ball is delivered. And obviously there's a lot of, long down the line, slow play, and the players sort of get sucked into that. Whereas the oppositions are doing a really good job of holding their width. And so once we don't win the ball from that contested position, they're finding it really easy to spread. And I think that's where a player, I still think that the absence of Will Snelling and Kyle Langford to an extent is really hurting us structurally. I know that in terms of, something we'll get to, I think in terms of forward 50 pressure, the lack of Snelling and the lack of Tipper means that it's a lot easier for oppositions to exit that. And the lack of Langford on a wing is limiting our ability to hold space. The replacements for those players are not performing to their standard. And to me, they're such critical parts of our structure that it's falling down because the other players aren't up to it. Now, that's not to say that that's an excuse. The other players, they're AFL players. A lot of them, they're at the point where they're at 30, 40, 50 games experience. They should be able to fill those roles, but we're not seeing it, and it's costing us. And it's probably the key difference today, as well as Collingwood's accuracy.
You talk about our forward 50 pressure, and if you look at the way the side was picked, and I know the way the side's picked is not always the way they line up, but that full forward line of Kane Baldwin, Jake Stringer and Nick Cox, there's not a lot of speed there. I mean, Cox is agile for a big man, but he's still not quick. Stringer's quick in bursts out of the centre, but you certainly wouldn't label him as fast. And Kane Baldwin's a key position player. So you look at that and go, we really are missing the Tip and Woody and Will Snelling, as you mentioned, style player who, once the ball hits the ground, it's not a complete loss. Dev Smith going backwards at a rate of knots has also really hurt us because he was that other pressure forward that we had that unfortunately just doesn't seem to be able to do it over 4 quarters at AFL level anymore. I mean, that may change, but it doesn't appear so at the moment. So, you do look at that forward 50 pressure, and it does come out relatively quickly. Once the ball hits the deck, teams do seem to clear it. So you raise a good point there, because that does obviously impact the midfield's ability to set up behind the ball. But even having said that, even if the ball is locked in our 50 for a length of time at the moment, the midfielders still don't seem to be able to set up. And I'm not sure exactly what more Truck can do, because I think the conversation at the moment is, has he lost the playing grip, which I think is absurd after 28 games. I can't imagine the bloke's lost the playing grip this early in his career. But there's not many more levers that Truck can really pull. Tex Wanganeen can come in, but he's not up to AFL standards yet. So at the moment, it just seems like it's something we're going to have to suffer through.
You could see it at the end of last year when they inquired about Roses and they went hard at Bobby Hill, that they were recognising that was a concern. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about the Davies and looking forward to them in the next year, but that's something that you can't rely on now, obviously. And so it's something that the leadership of the club were obviously concerned about. I'm surprised I didn't go harder for Stengel, although I think there was a pretty strong Geelong connection with him from the start. So I don't know how successful that would have been. But you could see the club knew that this was a concern. They probably were aware of Devon Smith's dropping output. I know they signed him to a 2-year deal, but he signed that quite early in the year. I expect that he got a low offer and he took it because he wasn't expecting to get much else. So it's something that the club was aware of and trying to rectify. And I think there were, especially at the end of last year, there were signs that Tipper wasn't quite all there. And there were, again, the concerns about where he would be at the start of next year. And then obviously Mosquito left as well. So they recognised that there was an issue there, and they were unable to fill it immediately. Obviously, they selected Wanganeen as that supplemental selection. And as you said, he's shown glimpses and he does try hard, but he's certainly not up to AFL standard yet. So I think that's probably one of the biggest issues in terms of being able to delay it. It's not even tackling. I mean, you go to the stats, there was only 3 inside 50 tackles, which comes from the fact that, you've got a forward line of Wright, Baldwin, Stringer, Waterman, Perkins. You've got Caldwell and Guelphy sort of roaming through the flanks there, but they're not necessarily big tacklers. Pressure play. Guelphy does try and does some pretty high profile things, but it's not a consistent thing. So I guess what I'm saying is that they were aware of the problem, were trying to fix it, and they were unable to do so. And then with Snelling going down, you don't have that pressure that delays the exit, and therefore they're able to move the ball through quickly, and then the backs become exposed.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly touch on the Davey twins because it's certainly something I think a lot of Essendon fans are looking forward to. But Owen Jr., I think at the moment isn't really going to be a small forward. I actually think he's going to end up being that winger midfielder type. And then you've got Jaden, of course, who's done the knee injury and will be a small forward, or looks like being a small forward. But I just don't think, and I'm not too sure how committed anyone is to this belief. And I think everyone's probably a little bit realistic. But the Davey twins certainly aren't going to be the answer. So we'll definitely need to look at that again at the end of this year because, I mean, if Tipper comes back at all, I was calling for him to be included a couple of weeks ago on the podcast. I've since seen him play a couple of VFL games, and I'm now incredibly reluctant to play him because he just doesn't look like he's up to VFL standards. So he certainly would probably look out of place at AFL. But yeah, so I'm a little bit wary of the Davey twins because one of them's not necessarily a small forward. I think everyone hears the name Davey and thinks of Owen, but they are obviously different players. So it'll be interesting to see how they come on. The other thing I want to talk about now is something that you sort of raised about the club being aware of issues and not filling the void, because I think as good as we were today in the clearances, and we certainly lifted our work rate around the ball compared to last week, which, I mean, let's be honest, we kind of had to, and we did dominate the clearances. We are still missing that big body, aren't we? And it's interesting that I think, there was a couple of posts raised that, the club try to identify it by going through Josh Dunkley. But really, you try and hit one player up. That's not really identifying, and that's not trying to fix a problem just by going for a top A grade, because there's certainly been plenty of other blokes we could have potentially had a crack at over the last 6 years since Joe retired.
I mean, there was Dunstan last year who we didn't necessarily try very hard for, who could have filled that role to some extent. So, maybe the club is missing out by not taking that opportunity. Hewitt was available, obviously went to Carlton, and, that would have just been cap space, which, judging by media reports, we have quite a lot of. So that could have been quite handy. It's hard today because the clearances were quite good. We won the clearances, and we actually won the around the ground clearances. So even last year when we were playing well, we were winning 70 clearances pretty comfortably, but we were losing around the ground clearances, whereas stoppage clearances today, we actually were successful. And it was really only that sort of 5-minute patch in the fourth quarter where Parrish had that ankle injury and was off, and Pendlebury went into the middle. And I think that ended up being the difference. They kicked another. Parrish went off just after the first goal in that sequence, and then they got the next 2 centre clearances, mainly through the work of Pendlebury. And, that ended up being the difference in the game. So it's hard necessarily to say in terms of the big bodies. I guess what it sort of means is that you don't have that protection for the extractors like a Parrish, like a Shield. And so they're getting hit a lot more. And so that sort of wears them down across the course of a game. And that can have a part in terms of how much they're running and just the smartness that they're running. Sometimes I think that our midfielders don't necessarily run smartly. So they blow themselves up on the possibility of getting a 50-50 chance of getting a possession. That then means they can't turn around and defend or cover the switch, which causes problems and allows for that quick ball movement. So it's hard. I mean, Dunkley's out of contract again this year. Do we go after him again? It depends where we finish in terms of where the draft picks end up. The one person that possibly could fill that role is Archie Perkins, close to 190 centimeters, really good through the hips. He's obviously not a big body at this stage, muscle mass wise, but, he's got a lot of attributes that would suggest that he is going to be a potential option in that role. It seemed like last week he was sick in some respects. He didn't really leave the forward 50 last week, so it might still be a bit of recovery for that. But, with the season the way it is, seeing him more in the centre square using his height and his hips, is a potential option to see whether that's an option going forward.
Yeah, and the reason I brought up the big body was pretty much the reason that you spoke of there with Pendlebury, where Parrish went to the bench and Pendlebury just took the game by the scruff of the neck in the middle. But if you look at Collingwood today, so Jordan De Goey had 7 clearances, Pendlebury had 5, and Jack Crisp had 4. So that's their leading clearance players, and they're all 190 plus. And then, Darcy obviously had 12. And then we have Dylan, who had 5, and Sam Draper and Andrew McGrath and Zach Merritt also, chipped in with 4 each. But really, none of those guys, I suppose, are those big, powerful mids. And Darcy's clearances, whilst Darcy played an exceptionally good game, he had 31 handballs. So, he's getting his clearances are handballs to other players, which is fine, but it means that we're lacking that big bollocking midfielder who's smashing through packs. But look, Luke Dunstan's going to be one that I'll always be used by, because he actually came out and said he wanted to go to Essendon. And Will Brodie's the other one, obviously, that Gold Coast paid for him and will take him off his hands. But those players are gone now. So I suppose I'm being a little bit silly bringing it up as a point for about today's game, but it did just sort of really strike me today that, geez, we're struggling around the ball at the moment, and not having a big protective body is something that is, I think, a concern, and definitely one that we need to adjust for. And I'm just not sure the club's actually done enough to adjust that in the last few years. But we will touch on a positive, and that is Darcy Parish, because there was a joke made by somebody who I was sitting with today that there's a medal on the line, Darcy, so time to turn up. And geez, he turned up, didn't he? He had 30 touches in the first half, 14 after half time. So you could say he dropped off a bit, but the bloke was probably exhausted. He had 12 clearances, which was just immense. He was the best on ground for that, and he was also best on ground for us by that stat by a mile. As I said, Shield only managed to have 5 alongside that. But I suppose the thing about Darcy's game at the moment is he's not getting a lot of return for all his possessions. So he's getting the clearance and getting it out to people. But I actually like Darcy by foot a fair bit. And so for him to have 13 kicks and 31 handballs, I think it's just a sign that maybe it's him at the coalface at the moment and not a lot else going on. I mean, Dylan Shield also had 16 handballs, but a lot of his handballs went to blokes' feet today. So yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because I thought Darcy played well, but there's still room for improvement in that game.
That's it. He seemed to be playing that first extractor, getting it to the players moving forward. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that he's focused on the handball. Like he's really good at the handball. He's got really good vision and he's really creative with that. And it was actually often working quite well where Darcy was getting that first handball out to a Zach or to a Dylan, and they would take it forward. What then happens is that you've got to rely on those players using it well. We saw Zach, return to using it quite well. Some of his weighted kicks were exceptional into the forward 50. And then on the other hand, you have Dylan Shield, who, I thought had an okay game, but he had his 4 inside 50s, I think, all through the first half. And I'm pretty sure that none of them hit a target, or they, it went to a 50-50. And that just kills you when you have those open opportunities to find someone on a lead, or to, even run forward and have a shot at goal. When they don't take that, that actually kills you a lot, because then, the opposition has the opportunity to take it out. And in our current situation, we don't have, the players to lock the ball in. Those inefficient inside 50s, cause us a lot of problems going the other way. I was tearing my hair out a few times with Dylan in terms of, just sort of lob balls on top of people's heads or missed targets. It was really frustrating. I found it really frustrating. I tweeted about it. I brought up something last week on Twitter as well. I sort of went through a play where Dylan had, an open opportunity to pass it and didn't take it. And then he was running to 50. And then instead of going for goal, which he should have, he pulled it to a 50-50, which we lost. And I'm just worried. I know he's very easy to pick on because of the amount of trade capital that we spent to get him. Do I think he's the worst player ever? No. Do I think what we've seen this past couple of years is what we wanted. Definitely not. Yeah, he cops a lot, and I want to defend him, but also some of the things he does is indefensible. Just in terms of his disposal inside 50, it just kills us, especially as I said, with the lack of ability to hold the ball in.
Yeah, look, with Dylan Shiel, I think the problem is that the truth lies somewhere in the middle with him at the moment in terms of what people say about him, because there is two camps at the moment, really, for Dylan Shiel, and they are very black and white, yin and yang. And one is that he was a complete waste of the draft capital. He's been useless since we brought in, and it was a complete waste of time by us, and what an absolute disaster the trade has been. The other side of it is that he has done exactly what we asked for. He's been injured. It hasn't been his fault. The trade was worth it. It was the player. He was the player we thought we got when we first got him, and it's only been injuries that have killed him since. And as I said, I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think there is justification for being disappointed with what his output has been since his first year with us. I thought his first year was very good, and I thought the talk about his kicking in his first year was extremely overrated. There was a lot of talk about how his kicking was rubbish, and I don't think it was anywhere near as bad as what the media would have had you believe. It's always hard to nail every kick when you're coming out of the clearance at breakneck speed like he was. But I think you can also say that he has been a little bit disappointing. But the inside 50s is something that you raised. And it's a good point. It's something I do want to touch on a bit broader about the side at the moment. So we had 52 inside 50s today. Collingwood only had 48. So on the face value, you look at that and go, well, we had more opportunities and we just didn't make the most of it, which, I mean, part of today's problem is, of course, Collingwood did kick 15 goals 3, which is just absolutely unbelievable. We kicked 12 goals 10, which is, well, I suppose in today's AFL is pretty standard, although we did miss a few sitters. But the thing is, those 52 inside 50s, again, the disposal's just not great. And I think part of the problem is today, especially today, was we overused the ball up the ground. We did a lot of, someone posted about it, we did a lot of octagonal handballs today. We just went round and round in an octagonal shape, and then we'd hack the ball forward. If you look at the disposals today, so we had 387 disposals. Collingwood had 338. So we had a lot more of the ball. But they had more kicks than us. So we had 195 kicks. They had 207. We had 192 handballs. So basically today, for every kick we had a handball, which at AFL level is not good enough. I get that sometimes the quick overlap handball is there and you hit it, but that's a lot of overuse of the ball. And so I think, we talk about the poor entries inside 50. That, to me at the moment, a large part of it is because we stuff around the ball so much up the ground that by the time we're actually in a position to put the ball inside 50, we've let the opposition run back, which, we've talked about the fact that we're not doing that, but we do let the opposition run back, fill the holes, and then expect Peter Wright to take a pack mark over 5 people.
There seems to be a lack of dare. There seems to be a lack of willingness to take risk, and that comes from just a general lack of confidence. I think we were speaking before we started recording, and I just think that first game against Geelong, where they got absolutely monstered, has killed their dare and killed their flair. There's a real lack of willingness to take the game on. Obviously, Nick Hines being down sub today instead of that. Redmond was okay today, I thought, and did do a little bit of that, but it's just a lack of dare and taking the risk, and that could be in part because they're not trusting, the players ahead of them because they're out of form there. There was more attempts today, I think, to change it up. Instead of going back down the line, there was a lot more switching of the ball. So the suggestion there that there was a lot more switching of the ball today, which we hadn't been seeing these last couple of weeks. So it suggests that they were trying something new, although there were very slow switches, so the Collingwood could get across. So there's obviously a lot of work to do there. And I think that's what it comes down to. So Collingwood obviously defended the stoppage zone quite well, and that's where those handballs come into it. And then, otherwise you're just getting people doing those hack kicks that people have, criticized Andrew McGrath for, they're sort of around the body kicks there. So they're obviously trying to work it to a point that they, get that free kick or that clear kick out to a target, whether that's a Peter Wright coming down the wing. So last year, when we were flowing, there were those handballs to advantage. So the handball would be to a position that the player would run onto, and therefore that would then create movement. Whereas a lot of the handballs are sort of backwards or, to stationary targets, particularly at the start today. They were very fumbly. Obviously, Merritt was coming back into it, was very fumbly at the start, worked his way into it. So there's not that crowd, unless it's Nick Martin. I know that I think every week's basically been a Nick Martin love fest around the Essendon Traps. But other than him at the moment, there's no one really being creative with handball. And that leads to those, that octagon handball that you're talking about. And that, again, that allows the opposition to set up and slow the transition of the ball forward. And then, obviously, because they're working so hard trying to get it out, they're stuffed and unable to defend on transition.
Yeah, and look, I do want to raise one positive about today's forward line, and because I think, as I said, we did have a lot of the ball in there today, and it wasn't used fantastically, but I don't think that was necessarily on the forwards. And so, I just want to point out Alec Waterman today, who I still don't understand how he wasn't in the side from the start of the year, but whatever, I'll move on because I've said that about every week. He kicked 4 goals. Jakey Stringer in his game back, he came in and kicked 3 goals too. Probably could have, snagged his 4th. Guelphy managed to kick a couple. Archie Perkins, who'd been a little bit out of form, as you mentioned, due to illness last week, there was talk of him being dropped. He came in and kicked 2 as well. And then if you also look at the scorer involvements, well, Alec had 7, Archie had 7, Matt Guelphy had 7, Jakey had 6, and Darcy Parish led the way, obviously, with 7, which you'd expect due to his immense numbers that he put up. So those 4 players, I think, probably did their jobs today from an offensive point of view. It's just, as we've said, there's just no real forward 50 pressure once that ball hits the deck. So that's something that obviously needs to work on. But if we are, I suppose, if you are trying to look at a little bit of a positive, at the end of the day, the forward's job is to kick goals. And really, Guelphy and Perkins, I don't think, are actually natural forwards. So I think those 2 guys in particular were pretty handy offensively today. And certainly Alec and Jake are very solid contributors and will continue to be up forward as we move on. And hopefully Jake gets a few more Ks back in the legs and can go back to his centre clearance role, pushing forward to expose the opposition midfielders.
That's it. I think if you're going to also talk about positives, you can't go past Sam Draper. I think he's copped a lot of criticism, and I think fairly, for his efforts over the first 5 rounds, and he really brought it today. Obviously, there's still a fitness issue. He faded late into the third quarter. I think that's where the selectors missed a trick by picking Baldwin over Brian. I actually saw Baldwin rucking. I was shocked to see that I did not pick him as the backup.
That's insane. For sorry, I'm just going to jump in. For Baldwin to be rucking, I mean, today's about his 5th or 6th game back from back-to-back knee recos at AFL level against someone like Brodie Grundy or even Darcy Cameron, who's a pretty handy backup ruckman. That's just mental from our coaching staff. I mean, it's just, I get that you have to at some point back your player in to have recovered from an injury, but it's such a serious injury. It's such a massive risk. And more importantly, the bloke's going to get out rucked because, as I said, Brodie Grundy, one of the best rucks to play the game the last 30 years, and Darcy Cameron more than handy. It's just a stupid decision from the coaching staff to throw Kane Baldwin into the ruck. But sorry, that's much my rant. I'll let you continue.
No, that's all right. You sort of expressed what I was feeling in that first quarter. They did switch back to Peter Wright as that backup ruck, particularly towards the end when Draper did fade there. But that the Draper for the first 3 quarters there, particularly in that third quarter, that's the Sammy Draper that we saw for a lot of last year when he came back into the side. And again, that's what gets people so excited. The great big puppy dog, he just picks the ball up and goes and no one can stop him. You talk about big body midfielders. Well, there you go. If he could kick, well, he'd be a Brownlow medalist, but he's probably never going to be a great kick. But what he brings to the side, and just the way he created so many forward opportunities because of his energy and his willingness to use his body. That great bump on, was it Lipinski that he got? Yeah, absolutely dropped in. It's one of the best bumps you've seen from an Essendon player this year. Just the fact that he was doing things like that, that's the sort of thing that lifts the side. And when he's playing like that, he just brings everyone along with him. Obviously, he couldn't keep it up, and that's where I think, again, they missed a trick by not playing Brian. You could have rested Sammy a bit more and have him going into that fourth quarter, because as we could tell, Grundy did have more of an impact in that last quarter, obviously, in conjunction with Pendlebury. So, there's still a fitness work to go in terms of Sammy Draper, but that was really pleasing to see, just his energy. He took marks today. He hasn't been taking marks all year. If you can keep that sort of form up for the rest of the year, getting that experience, that's really going to set him up for the future.
Yeah, and look, I've definitely been one of Draper's biggest critics, especially on this podcast. But he was good today. did enjoy watching him today. He played with aggression. That hit, as you said, the hit on Lipinski, which I think you've got that one right. That sort of proves that the bump is not dead. He managed to do that fairly without any malice and without any repercussions. There'll certainly be nothing from the MRO about that. And the other thing was he got plenty of the ball. So that's been my main criticism of him, is that people point to the hit-outs and go, well, he's won the hit-outs. And I go, well, he has, but he doesn't do anything else around the ball. Whereas today he did. He did drop a couple of marks in the back 50. But I mean, if I was to sit here and list all the dumb things that players did today, the podcast would go for 2 hours, because I actually had a list earlier that I was going to mention, but I'm not going to waste everyone's time, because I think we all saw it, and enough of the negativity. So yeah, no, I certainly thought Sammy's game today was very good. But yeah, as you said, Kane Baldwin in the ruck, absolutely missed a trick not playing Brian. I mean, look, Kane kicked 5 goals last week, and Grizz and I both said last week that, 5 goals, if Harrison Jones isn't fit, you've got to bring Baldwin in. But I think we saw today that Kane Baldwin is just not up to AFL level yet. So 5 goals at VFL level is great, and in theory that should translate to AFL, but it's clearly not going to yet. And we saw that with Kane a couple of times there, where if he just put the jukes out and just ran at the ball, he would have taken a couple of marks. I think there was one there in the second quarter where he tried to take the ball in his chest, and if he just put the arms out, he would have taken it. Like, you just think about it. He plucks that mark, he goes back, has a shot from 25 metres out, he kicks the goal. How good's his confidence? He's up and about, but instead, he put the arms in to try and take the chest mark. And then that other one out on the half forward line, where I think
Darcy Moore,
got the spoil. I mean, he was sort of going
backwards, and if he'd been able to take a couple of steps forward, he probably there, but just sort of his momentum meant he was set up more to take it on the chest.
It was, but the other problem was he did sort of stop and prop. Whereas if he, so he was back. You're right. His initial momentum was backwards, but then he stopped, and he probably could have got himself forward. And again, if he just moved forward a metre, he takes that mark. He feels the bump from because. He still takes the hit, but he at least takes the mark. It's a bit of confidence, and football is a confidence game. At the end of the day, you can have the best players in the world, but if their confidence is shot and they've got no momentum behind them, they're always going to be run over by the little bloke who's got his tail up and is loving life, as unfortunately we saw today with Giovanni. Is Giovanni from
Ginnivan? Yeah, I didn't think
from Collingwood.
I didn't think I could hate anyone as much as I despise Cody Waitman, but some of Ginnivan's carry on today, I don't like to agree with Kane Corns on things, but he was starting to make a lot of sense just watching some of his reactions. But fair play to him. You kick 5 goals, you win the ANZAC Day medal. Fair play.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. I think. Let's be honest. At the end of the day, if he was an Essendon player, I think we'd all love. He's the Toby Green, isn't he? You hate him because he's not playing for your team.
Absolutely. I think there was Hind probably deserved to be dropped, but I think there was he would have been a good matchup for Ginnivan. I know if you go back to the Melbourne game, Hind actually did a really good job on Cozzy Pickett, and Hind probably could have gone with Ginnivan today. Heppel got stuck on him. And yeah, love Heps. I thought Heps was solid otherwise, but yeah, Ginnivan just torched him whenever he was on him, and that sort of cost us. I think the other just another positive just to bring up. So generally, Collingwood's been a pretty efficient side going inside forward 50. Their forward 50 efficiency's been at 45% for the year, whereas today was actually only 37.5. Now I know they kicked well, and that was probably the difference between the sides, but. And there were obviously a lot of high-profile times where Collingwood moved the ball through the centre and into the forward 50. But we actually, in some aspects, we actually held up quite well as a defensive unit in that sense, in that we weren't letting them have as many effective entries as they otherwise would have. And as we all can tell, the amount of scoring shots they have, actually, we lowered the amount of scoring. They've been having 26 scoring shots a game before this week, and they were only down to 18 today. Fortunately, they kicked 15-3, whereas, regular sides probably kicked 10-8. And we win that game. So it's you don't want to say, we were unlucky in that sense, but Collingwood had, that was the best kicking for goals since 1994 or something like that. I don't know. I'm always someone who tries to be optimistic and look at the positives. And maybe I'm being a bit too positive with that, but it feels like a match we should have won, and it feels like one that we've let slip away with just a couple of things that, really frustrate you as a fan sometimes.
Yeah, look, I'm probably a bit different in the fact that I still think the better team won today, because part of being the better team is obviously taking your chances. And a lot of the goals they kicked, yeah, I mean, they did kick quite a few. Oh, not quite a few. They kicked a couple that were probably, if you give them a chance, you give that to them, they probably won't kick it more than 5 or 6 times out of 10. But a lot of their shots were relatively straightforward shots. We just did not defend the ground well at all, which meant they were able to take that easier shot, and as a result, we're able to kick straighter. And yeah, so for me, I look at that and go, well, still the better team did win on the day. But we will quickly move forward, because we do have obviously the Bulldogs this week at Marvel Stadium, 3:20 on the Sunday, so the 3:20. So it will be the Channel 7 game on Sunday. 2-4 the Bulldogs, not in great touch. They obviously got beaten by the Crows by a point, who we managed to beat by 4 points. So in that theory, we should beat the Bulldogs by 5 points this Sunday. But obviously, we know it doesn't work like that. But we'll still pretend that for the time being. The main thing is obviously going to be their midfield, because I don't think there's. I mean, I don't think there's apart from Aaron Norton. I don't really rate the Bulldogs tools at all. I don't think Jamar Ugle-Hagen's anywhere near as good as what people would have you believe. I don't think he's ever going to be as good as what people would have you believe, but that's just my personal opinion. So yeah, it really does come down to the midfield, and unfortunately, their midfield stacks up pretty good, and so it's a big strength of theirs. So it's going to be a tough one this week with the bodies like the Dunkleys, the Bontempellis. You got McRae in there as well, who gets his fair bit of the ball. Bailey Smith, Bailey Dale, take for example, Liberatore. I mean, take any of those blokes, and they're probably starting in the midfield for us.
Absolutely, and there's obviously a big difference between playing, out at windy Ballarat, where it's under 0 degrees half the time, versus playing under the roof at the Dome. So that will obviously benefit them. They do seem to be struggling forward and back, the Dogs, at the moment, and even with their high profile midfield, they're not exactly dominating sides. There seems to be something off with the Bulldogs. I think, a lot of people talk about Adelaide being broken after the 2017 grand final. Is it too soon to start speaking about how the Demons broke Melbourne in the second half of last year's grand final?
Demons broke the Bulldogs, I think you mean.
Sorry, Demons. Yeah, sorry. So again, is it too soon to be talking about how the Demons broke the Bulldogs? It seems sometimes, the names on their sheet, they should win easily. The way they're playing, and I do have some confidence coming out of this game that we are on an upward trend, as long as we don't have too many injuries coming out of it, in terms of, say, Laverde and Parrish, if they can get up and good to go. I always have hope. You're despondent after the game, and then you build yourself up across the week. So I think by the time the game rolls around, they'd be like, oh yeah, well we're a decent chance here, and then something like 2019 Bulldogs game happens, and then you start the cycle all over again. But I think they're gettable, and if we'd won today, and I think we actually had a couple of winnable games there that we could have got close to parity. So finals are close to a pipe dream at the moment, but you never know if you start getting a roll on it, and a team like the Bulldogs that's not playing very well. If you come along and you have a good day, and your players play their role, I think there's an opportunity there to get our second win for the season.
Yeah, so we will just very briefly touch on potential changes, and I'll just say right now, I think Kane Baldwin has to come out for Nick Bryan. Or maybe Aaron Francis if he's fit. Who knows if he'll be fit? But I'm not sure yet. If Laverdes goes down, I think Zach Reid comes into the side. He played very well in the VFL today. Took 8 marks down the back, and he's starting to look like the player that we hoped he'd be when we drafted him. And to be honest, I'd probably nearly bring him in anyway. I love Zerk Thatcher's defensive efforts. I've said it before. I'll say it again. I think he's great one-on-one defensively. The problem is I don't think there's a great deal of difference between what him and Laverde bring to the side in terms of their size or their individuality. I think that they're very similar, and I think Laverde's just playing that role better at the moment. So I'd probably, if push comes to shove, Zerk goes out, Reid comes in. The other interesting one, of course, is the famous name which we've all seen, which is Tom Hurd. Did have 27 disposals, kicked 2 goals, had a couple of clearances in the forward line today for the Bombers. We need a pressure forward. Could we turn to a Hurd? Could Hurd be the saviour of the Essendon Football Club all over again? I'm not sure, but I'd love to bring him in. Even if it is just the fact that it's James's son, I just love to get him into the side. The other 2, obviously, that stood out for us are blokes that probably aren't going to come back in. Devon Smith had 28 touches, 4 clearances, 4 marks. got involved a fair bit. Braden Ham, I thought, played exceptionally well at VFL level. It's frustrating because, 27 disposals, but alongside that, he had 10 tackles, which is huge for a bloke of his size. And he does games like that just make me go, maybe there's still hope for him at AFL level. I've been pretty down on him this year, and Grizz would love to be here to talk about him because he's had a great game today. So, you look at that and go, well, I'd probably maybe look at, as I said, I'd bring Brian in for Baldwin. Reed comes in for Zerk Thatcher for mine. Tom Hurd in for someone because I'm a romantic. Let's bring him in. And then other than that, Tom Cutler didn't really do a great deal wrong. But if you're going to bring a halfbacker in, you'd have to bring Hind back in because Mason Redmond played well, but we were just lacking pace.
That's it. I think the one thing about Braden Ham's game that stands out from that is the 10 tackles. It's something that when he was in the side at the start of the year, that's sort of the role he's expected to play. He was almost filling in for a Snelling in that tackling way, and he wasn't doing that, and that's probably part of the reason why he got dropped. So if he's doing that at VFL and you can translate that to AFL, then you're probably looking at someone who can fill a role there. Hurd's been building. He's done a couple of nice things the last couple of seasons, and you do want to say it's. You just don't want it to be.
His name's Hurd. His name is Hurd. Let's bring him in.
I get it, but you don't just want to bring the guy in because his name's Hurd. It's going to pump up the fans and get them excited. You want him to earn it. And it looks like if he's played like that. He's been creative. He's tackled. If he was to come in based on that game, you would say that it was earned. So you'd want to hopefully maybe find a spot for him. I don't expect they'll make too many changes unless they're forced by injury at this stage, because I think they went some way to rectify in the Fremantle game, and I think if they hadn't done that, then that's when you would have seen wholesale changes.
Jamie was meant to be on the podcast tonight, but he has bailed at the last minute. So I'm just doing exactly what he would be doing right now and saying, bring in Hurd. Hurd is the savior. He will lead us to glory. And the other little thing I have noticed looking at the VFL today is if you look at the clearance numbers. So Joe Atley led the way, Sam Conforti, Dev Smith, obviously, Joel Fitzgerald, Braden Ham, and then who's sitting down there all the way in number 6 for us, and that's Alex Hurd, the other brother. He played his first game today. He didn't have much of a game. He had 9 touches, didn't have a great deal of the ball, but he did still manage 3 clearances. So Tom did tell me last year that Alex is the better player, so I'll watch his career with interest. But yes, as you've said, you do not bring Tom Hurd in because he's Tom Hurd, despite my over-enthusiastic proclamations that he should be playing because he is a Hurd, but he appears to have earned a spot. Whether or not there is one for him, we'll wait and see. But thank you for joining me tonight, Kip. You've done admirably well filling Grizz's very, very large shoes.
No, thanks for having me. It's been good to be back again. Hopefully, if I'm back again in a few weeks, we're talking about happier times and about our great winning streak and how finals are just around the corner for us. But fingers crossed things improve and we get a win next week. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, that will do us. As always, if you could please like, subscribe and comment and tell us what you like, that would be fantastic. But other than that, as Kip said, hopefully next week we're talking about a win.